right there. So anyway, all a mid-segment is, I'll give you the definition in a second, but what it says right here, it says N is the midpoint of LJ. So N is right in the middle of this whole side of the triangle. And they mark the diagram to show you on either side of the midpoint those segments are congruent. So some of these drawings can have a lot of markings in them just to indicate midpoints. But it does tell you N is a midpoint, O is a midpoint, and M is a midpoint. So you guys know what a midpoint is, right in the middle of a segment. A mid-segment in this lovely diagram, the NO is a mid-segment, OM is a different mid-segment, and NM or MM, you could flip the letters around. Each one of those is a mid-segment. So all it is a segment connecting two midpoints. So, like, N is the midpoint of this segment here from L to J. O is the midpoint of this segment from L to K. The mid-segment connects those two midpoints to each other. So any triangle, you could draw three, and like I said, not all these diagrams will have all three of them drawn in, but there are three possible mid-segments for any triangle. Okay, now, what we're actually going to look at, I just have one right underneath here. There's two special properties if you have a mid-segment. So in the diagram right here where it says triangle mid-segment theorem, DE, that would be the mid-segment. D is the midpoint, E is the midpoint, DE is the segment connecting those two midpoints. And then I'm going to highlight the side in the triangle from A to B because there's a relationship there. Okay, so here's how this works. There's two special things to do with the mid-segment. So a mid-segment is parallel to one side of the triangle. So any mid-segment is going to be parallel to one of the sides in the triangle. In the drawing right there, the side that DE is parallel to is going to be AB. That's why I highlighted both of those. So in this, if you want to use this like as a little example, DE, that's the mid-segment, is parallel to AB. That's the side in the triangle, just as an example for that picture. Okay, the other thing that is special about this, they're parallel lines. The mid-segment is going to be half the length of, I'm not trying to write all this out, but I'm going to, is going to be half the length of the side it's parallel to. It's the mid-segment, that's going to be a shorter of the two. The mid-segment is going to be exactly half the length of that side in the triangle that it's parallel to. So let me just make up a number so you guys have this as an example. Like if I knew the side from A to B in that diagram was 10, automatically I would know that the mid-segment would be 5. So if you know the side in the triangle, you can cut it in half to get the mid-segment that it's parallel to. If you have the mid-segment, you could multiply that by 2 to get the side of the triangle it's parallel to. It's 2-to-1 relationship if you want to think about our similarity unit at all. All right, so all I'm going to ask you to do in this first example is just identify lines that are parallel to each other. So basically, if I pick out a mid-segment, what side in the triangle is it parallel to? And just to be consistent, I'm just going to highlight them in the same color. So like PQ, mid-segment. P is the midpoint, Q is the midpoint. I'm just connecting the dots there. That is parallel to the side XZ in the overall triangle. I don't have any numbers here. We're just identifying what side of the triangle the mid-segment is parallel to. So as an example there, PQ is parallel to XZ. You should have 3 sets if you have all 3 of the mid-segments drawn in. Okay, so if I looked at QR, that segment in the triangle, what side of the triangle would that mid-segment be parallel to? XY, perfect. That's all I gotta do. What side is it parallel to? And then I got one more. So I got PR, and that's got to be the only other side in the triangle I don't have highlighted, which is YZ. Now, any of these, if you guys flip the letters around like I wrote PR, if you wrote RP, that's describing the same segment. So it doesn't have to match what I'm writing exactly to be correct. And like I'm going to write YZ, but if you wrote ZY, that's describing the same segment. Okay, any question about determining what side it's parallel to in the diagram? Okay, I'm just gonna sketch a little tiny triangle just real quick because there's a question on the homework that goes over something like this. I'm just gonna kind of eyeball this. I'm not constructing it or anything. But I just want to remind you of a little thing because there's a little kind of throwback question on the homework. Let's say this was a mid segment here, so I'll just make this up real quick. And I just want to remind you, so if the mid segment is parallel to one of the sides in the triangle, don't forget this, there's going to be a homework question that'll ask you about this. If you have parallel lines, remember that could create like alternate interior angles, same side interior angles, corresponding angles. This specifically is going to be, I'm going to write corresponding angles. So this angle here and this angle here would be corresponding, so they'll be congruent to each other. And I can make that same argument like here, this corner and this one, those angles would be congruent to each other. I just don't have any questions on the notes that talk about angles, but there's one in the homework. So just remember, if you got parallel lines, you can have corresponding angles that are congruent. Shouldn't see anything with like alternate interior, but there's some corresponding. Okay. Now, this question is going to deal with, can you find segment lengths? So remember, if I have a mid-segment that's parallel to one of the sides in the triangle, the mid-segment will be exactly half the side in the triangle it's parallel to. If I know the mid-segment, I can multiply that by 2 to get the side in the triangle. And the other key thing to remember here, any of these, I'll just highlight them in this diagram. So I have like G, J, and H. Don't forget those are midpoints for one of the sides of the triangle, and that might be helpful to find a missing piece they're going to ask you for in the question. Okay, the first thing I'm going to ask you, see if you can figure out, can anybody tell me, just raise your hand, what would the length of the segment, this is kind of tricky, from F to H be in that diagram? F to H, would you tell me? It's 10.6. How'd you get that? Yes, this is a midpoint, right? So on either side of that, those have to be exactly the same length. So if this is 10.6, this is 10.6. So some of these are not, you won't even have to do anything. You just kind of figure it out from looking at the diagram. Okay, where is E to F? Okay, EF is this whole side here in the triangle. I know on either side of H, that's the midpoint, 10.6, 10.6. So you just add those two together, or take 10.6 multiplied by 2. It's 21.2. Not a nice number there, but that's okay. So that whole side there would be 21.2. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to garbage this diagram up a little bit. DF. All right, so DF is this whole side in the overall triangle. Can anybody tell me how long that segment would be? 16. How'd you get 16? Yeah. Do you guys see D to G is marked as 8, so G to F also has to be 8. So the whole thing, 8 and 8, would add up to 16. Okay, where is, okay, JH is a mid-segment. So here's JH. And I just highlighted that in purple also because it's parallel to that side I highlighted from D to F, the same color. So those are parallel to each other. What would the length of the segment from J to H be? What do you think? Yeah, you just take this, divide it by 2. So if you know the side in the triangle, you're just going to cut it in half. 16 divided by 2 is 8. So the mid segment will be exactly half the length of the segment that it's parallel to in the triangle. All right, GH. Can't read this. Okay, I don't have any colors on this one yet. All right, here is GH. And just to help you real quick, the side in the triangle that is parallel to that mid segment, parallel to the side from D to E. Can anybody tell me what GH, what would the length of that be? Good, it's 12. How'd you get 12? Exactly. So it's parallel. This side is 24. You just cut that in half. 24 divided by 2 is going to give you 12. Okay, and then the last one, J to G, is parallel to this side in the triangle. That 21.2, that's where I might grab my calculator real quick. But if you just take 21.2, divide that by 2, that should give you 10.6. Okay. Now, you can't actually find the perimeter of both of these. We literally have every segment in that diagram labeled. So D, E, F, that is, here's D, here's E, here's F. So that is the big overall triangle. So it'd be, one of the sides is 24, one of the sides is 21.2, and the third side that I hadn't written down there yet, 16. Just add those guys up. This should give you, excuse me, 61.2. And then JHG, that's the little triangle that's formed by the 3 mid segments. So it would be, one of the sides is 10.6, one of them is 8, and the other one is 12. And if you just add those 3 sides up, you should get 30.6. Okay, now I know this is not super obvious because these are decimals. What is the relationship between those 2 perimeters though? Does anybody know? Exactly. It's just like the sides. It's exactly half. It's a 2-to-1 relationship. So the bigger triangle, like if you grab your calculator and you take 61.2, if you just cut that in half, divide that by 2, you'll see it's the 30.6. So the smaller triangle has exactly half the perimeter of the larger triangle there. So that's something you might use in a problem to help you. Is anybody having a question so far? Okay. Now, this one is not quite as garbaged up. It doesn't have a lot of the markings, but it does say T, U, and B are midpoints. So they just don't have the markings in the diagram for the segments being congruent to each other on either side of the midpoint. But these are mid segments, and it's going to ask you to tell me the length of TU, UB, and QR. Okay, so let me start with TU. Where is that at? Okay, so here's TU. This is a mid-segment. If you're doing a problem like this, you want to find the side in the triangle that it's parallel to, which I'm just going to highlight them the same color there. So that's parallel to RS. What would you tell me the length of TU is? What do you think? Perfect, 30. This is 60. This will be exactly half of that, so this will just be 30. The mid-segment's going to be half the length of the side that it's parallel to. Okay, UB is here. So that's parallel to the side here from Q to S. What would you tell me the length of UB is? 35. Perfect. All right. You're just going to take, it's parallel to the 70. You just cut that in half. This is going to be 35. Okay, now the last one actually wants one of the sides in the triangle. So from Q to R, that's parallel to the mid-segment from T to B. What would QR, the whole length of that be? 100. Good. So if you have the mid-segment, that's obviously smaller, right? If you're looking at the diagram, just multiply that by 2, and that'll give you the side in the triangle. Is anybody having a question? It's not terrible. Okay. Now this next one just doesn't label anything in the diagram, so this is really just to help you practice labeling in the diagram, but it's going to be kind of the same type of a question. I'm going to give you some information. You're going to tell me some side lengths here. Maybe if I can get this on the screen. Nope, nope. There we go. All right, so I'm just going to label some stuff. All right, before I start, I'm just going to highlight the mid segment and the side that it's parallel to, just the same color, just to help me out a little bit as I do the question. And this does have all 3 mid segments drawn into the lovely picture. And then I'm just going to mark up what they tell me in the directions here. So R to T is supposed to be 9.5. L to O, that's a whole side in the triangle, 35. And O to B, that's another whole side in the triangle, is 29. Okay. What are we going to find here? The first one I have says, let's find the length of LB. What is that, or how would you find it, or both? 9.5 times 2. So it's parallel, that mid segment, if you, ooh, I'm throwing things. If you know the mid segment, you're just going to multiply it by 2, and, oh, my brain just stopped functioning. What is that, 19? Okay, so then this whole side here would be 19. Okay. Where AT, on my paper, I colored this in purple. What would AT be, or how would you find it? What would you do to find the segment from A to T? Yes, ma'am. 35, it's parallel to the side in the triangle that's L to O, that's 35. You cut that in half. Now, if you want to leave that, as long as that fraction's reduced, I would take that as an answer if you want to leave it like that. If you actually want to divide this, this should be 17.5. Either way, whatever's easier for you. Let's see. AR is a mid-segment here. It's in green on my paper. What would AR be, or how would you find that? What would you do to find that segment? Perfect. It's parallel to the side that's 29. Just 29 divided by 2. Oh my gosh, my brain. All right. I think that's 14.5 as a guess. Okay, just checking. 14.5. Okay, is anybody having a question so far? Okay, I have to make them more complicated, so that's what you're going to see next. So everything we've done so far has just been plain numbers. We're going to have some variables in the problems that we're going to look at in the example underneath here. Okay, so X, let me just highlight this real quick. X is supposed to be labeling this segment right here. It's not super close to it, and it's hard to see in the diagram, but that's supposed to be the segment that's labeled with X. The only other thing I have here is this whole side in the triangle is 26, which those two are parallel to each other, so we can use that to help us figure it out. What would you write down for X for that question? Just 13. You know, the side in the triangle is 26. If you want the mid segment, it's parallel to, you're just going to cut it in half or divide it by 2. X there is going to be 13. Okay. Now, these questions, I'm just going to give you a little, here's what I would do. Okay, if you know a number for one of the sides, if it's the mid segment or if it's the side in the triangle, in this question in the middle here, I know that the side in the triangle is supposed to be 45. I'm just going to ignore that 5x that's there just for a second. If I know the side in the triangle should be, or is 45, what should the mid segment be? Or how would I figure it out? 45 divided by 2. Okay, so I just totally ignored that expression for a second. I know the mid segment should be 45 divided by 2, which is 22.5. So I know this guy should be 22.5. I would figure that out first, and then just that segment is labeled with 5x. So I know that's supposed to be equal to 22.5. I would just do that first real quick, and then go ahead. Once you have that, you're just going to divide by 5 here. It's just one step. And if you do this, it's not bad. It's x is 4.5 here. Okay, now similar. On this question, I have a mid-segment labeled with an 8, and I know the side it's parallel to in the triangle has got this expression 5x minus 4. Let me just ignore that expression for a second. If the mid-segment is 8, what should the side in the triangle be that it's parallel to? 16. Oh, I thought someone said 12. Okay, so this should be 16. Like, figure that out first and then find your variable. So I know this should be 16. So then I can just take 5x minus 4 and set that equal to 16 real quick. And then usually once you set that up, the equation's not too bad to do. So this would be 5x is equal to 20. Just going to divide both sides by 5 here real quick. And actually x is just 4. So it's a nice number for this question. Okay, is anybody having a question at the moment? Okay, now the next one is probably the trickiest of all. I don't have just a plain number on either segment that's labeled here. I do have a mid segment from Z to Y. Z is a midpoint, Y is a midpoint. There's the segment connecting it. And the side it's parallel to in the triangle is S to Q. So both of these have an expression. z to y is x plus 2, and s to q is 3x minus 8. Okay. There's two ways to do this. What do you think? What would you do?
So you know how you set up the equation? So put x plus 2 in parentheses on the outside. The proper, that's what it is.
Okay, and to be honest with you, this is exactly what I would do. Okay, I know if I have the mid segment, if I multiply that by 2, that should be equal to the side it's parallel to in the triangle. That would be what I would want for you to do if I was having you do this question. Now, I'm just going to write this down, but you do not have to. I'm just going to write this down. I would not recommend this, but I'll show you why in a second. The other way I could write this, the side in the triangle, like the S to Q, I know if I cut that in half, that should be equal to the mid segment. So if you were thinking of that, would work also. I just would not recommend that because then you're messing around with a fraction and you'd have to distribute a 1/2, and frankly that's annoying. So I would not recommend that. What I would do if you get a problem like this, take the mid segment, multiply that by 2, because then you just multiply the two terms by 2. It'll be a little bit easier to work with, and set it equal to the side it's parallel to. Both of these would give you the same answer. I just think this one's a little bit less work if you take the mid segment and multiply that by 2. So this would be just 2x plus 4, just got to do a little distributive property, and then 3x minus 8. However you guys want to do it. I usually like to try to keep my variable positive if I can. So if it was me, I would subtract 2x from both sides. That would leave me with 4 equals just 1x, because 3 minus 2 is 1. And then it'd just be x minus 8. All you have to do is add 8. So x would be 12 in that problem. Both of those equations I just wrote down would work. I would just recommend take the mid segment, multiply that expression by 2. That'll be a little bit easier to work with algebraically. Question? Oh, you're already on the next problem. I'm being slow today. Yeah, of course you can. Okay. Use any calculator I got laying around. It's yours. Okay. Last question. This is not bad, I promise. Okay, now it says perimeter of PQR. So PQR is the overall larger triangle. So this is not the mid segments, this is the triangle. The perimeter of that is 504. Now, the question says find the value of x, but you'll notice, and I'm not highlighting things that are parallel to each other here, I'm just outlining these two triangles. So x is involved here on each of these mid segments. Okay, now, I could multiply some expressions by 2. I would not do that though. Here's what I would ask you. What would you tell me the perimeter of that triangle that's formed by the mid segments? It would be STU. Could you tell me, or could we figure out what the perimeter of that smaller triangle should be? Exactly. So if you have the 504, right, the larger triangle, it's a 2-to-1 relationship. All you have to do is take that 504 and cut it in half. All right, and that's actually not a bad number. It's 252. So that should be the perimeter there. Then I've got each of those sides labeled. I'm just going to add those guys up. So I've got a 3x, a 5x, and a 4x. And it's supposed to add up to 252. The key there is just to remember the smaller triangle should be exactly half the larger triangle when you're talking about the perimeter. These are all like terms. 3 and 5 is 8, plus 4 is 12, so this would be 12 x's. And you're just going to take and divide 252 by 12. And x would be 21 there. Now, that's all it asks you for, but if knowing that information, you could actually plug that back in and find me every single segment in that diagram. Just knowing that information, you could plug 21 for x and find a bunch of different pieces of information from that. And that's pretty much all with the mid segments. Is anybody having a question? Excellent. We have a ton of time before